Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and it's great to be here on a Wednesday lunchtime amongst people who share the views of the majority of people in the United Kingdom. It's worth saying, as we all in this room share similar views, that I'm pleased to be on the platform with Priti and John this lunchtime, but I guess, without asking, that on the vast majority of issues, certainly a majority of issues, we would disagree. Not this issue, but what leaving the European Union is actually about is making our disagreements meaningful. Because if, as is the case at the moment, a majority of our laws are passed by the European Union, then John, Priti and I can debate as much as we like, but the decisions will be taken in Brussels. And the importance of what we're doing over the road at the moment is to make sure those debates remain vital and representative of the people of the United Kingdom. We've just mentioned a crisis of democracy, and there is a crisis. There is a majority in the Commons, and even larger majority in the Lords, who are Remainers, and many of them explicitly want to overturn the decision. One of the candidates for the leadership of the Labour Party, Owen Smith, is honest and straightforward about it, as are a number of other Labour MPs. Some think they're trying to do their best, that they think that they are defending their constituents by putting more and more barriers in the way of leaving the European Union. They're wrong, quite simply, and I hope that the debates that we're having will persuade them of that. In actual fact, although it's been quite a lonely position to be a Eurosceptic in the current Labour Party. It wasn't like that 30, 40 years ago. 31 Labour MPs refused to support the Labour whip last night on Yvette Cooper's amendment. I think that's certainly in this Parliament, is the largest vote against the Labour whip by Labour members in support of not stopping Brexit, if I can use a double negative. Because of all the votes we had last night, the most dangerous vote was Yvette Cooper's amendment. It was not only going to delay leaving the European Union until the 31st of December, it would mean that nobody would know who was in control. Because when you have 650, slightly less, but over 600 members of Parliament, all with varied and different views, it would be impossible to know what was going to happen. And one of the, I think, reasonable points that Barnier has made is we can't negotiate with a government that doesn't come to us and tell us exactly what they want. And if you had the Commons, week by week, voting for different laws, different decisions, not knowing who to send, there would be chaos and we would never leave the European Union. So the defeat of the Cooper Amendment last night was significant. The other amendments were non-binding. I mean, obviously the government have to take notice of them in some form or other, but all in one way or another were deferring the decision, asking for Article 50 to be extended, or to say that no deal was not an option. And I think those people who were pursuing those arguments and those motions fundamentally misunderstand two things. They misunderstand the nature of the European Union. Often in discussing the European Union, my colleagues use kindergarten language. They say they're our friends in Brussels, And, how could they not have our interests at heart? Because they're our friends. Well, I think it misunderstands that actually the bureaucrats in Brussels are a self-interested group of people, self-interested in their own survival and perpetuating their growing power and influence across the whole of the European continent. It also misunderstands the fact that the European Union do negotiate, but they usually come to agreements at the last minute, the 11th hour. And that is possible, which is why it's important to have sent the Prime Minister back to Brussels over the next fortnight, because I think that the European Union, one can't be certain, actually want to come to a deal, because we have to remember that we run between an 80 and a 90 billion trade deficit with the European Union. And while there might be disruption to both sides, that would be a huge problem to many of the EU countries. So I think they misunderstand the EU in that sense. They also misunderstand negotiations. I've offered to send Len McCluskey over to the Prime Minister to give us some lessons in negotiation. No shop steward trade unionist would go into negotiations with the management and say, whatever you do, we won't go on strike. We just won't. So please give us a pay rise. It's not a very sensible negotiating strategy, and nor is it to say, whatever you do, we won't leave without a deal. So where is the incentive there, apart from the trade deficit, for the European Union to agree anything? So I think my colleagues, sometimes willfully, because they want to stop Brexit, sometimes I think it's just a mistake and a misunderstanding of the nature of the European Union. When we move away from the democratic arguments and the negotiations, the other arguments that many of the people who want not a clean break with the EU but would like us to have a Norway style arrangement with them want, say there is going to be tremendous economic damage done if we leave now. There will undoubtedly be some disruption. You cannot change the relationship with a major trading bloc, major bureaucracy, and potentially a new country like the European Union without there being some disruption. But if you look at the continuation of Project Fear that is being continued at the moment, and you look at, say, what the aeroplane makers, Airbus, said earlier this week that they would think of going, it only requires a minute's thought about the manufacture of aeroplanes and how it exists. Both Boeing and Airbus survive, and their strategy is to look for public subsidy. That's what they do. Boeing primarily by the defence contracts they get in the States, more direct subsidies from the European Union and countries in Europe to Airbus. Actually, if we were outside the European Union, we would be free to pay as we wished, more or less, to Airbus. But what we would also be stopping would be the subsidies that have been given to take manufacturing jobs out of this country and to send them to Slovakia with our own money. So on that basis, we have a double win, not the continuation of Project Fear. And of course, we've been told for months that we would not be able to import or export because the French wouldn't let our goods through Calais. But when the prefecture of Calais came on, he said, there's no problem, we're completely ready. Why would we want to stop our people exporting farm goods and other goods? We want to export them, we want to sell them, and we won't stop your goods coming in. And the idea that there won't be food in our shops, or that, or that people who have elected to have operations, have gone for elective surgery, won't be able to have the drugs to take them. It is just pure scaremongering that, say, a moment's reflection shows clearly to be unfounded and not true. I think the final major point on the economy is it's very similar to the first point I made, that we need to make the debate between the parties and individuals meaningful, and that debate needs to end with us having regulations and laws which suit this country, so that we do not have either lowest common denominator regulations, or much more likely regulations that suit German manufacturing or some of the prejudices of the Commission, rather than what is good for this country. It's a technical subject, but it's important because it's about the future of our science and about the future of our industry. There was a decision by the European Court of Justice in July of this year that effectively said you could not use a particular kind of genetic manipulation to create plants that would be resistant to insects. It was manipulating genes that were already in those plants, and they decided to put it in under a different regulations related to genetically modified organisms. That might sound obscure, but much of the future of this country relies on us being in high-tech industries, relies on us having an agrochemical business, relies on us being at the forefront of science so that we can sell those skills and products around the world. And that stops it. I think that once we're out of the European Union, we can have a debate. There are some people who wouldn't agree with that. We can have a debate in Parliament and come to a conclusion about what is better for our industry and our science and our country, so that we get regulations. One can go through regulation after regulation that has not fitted this country's future. So we're here now. We no doubt will be back in a fortnight or so, maybe before, with more knife-edge votes on different issues. I think what last night showed was there were more Labour MPs who actually, they're Remainers, but they want to honour the decision of the referendum. They believe in democracy and that side. I think we will get it through. I hope the Prime Minister comes back with a good deal. I don't know whether she will or not. But what we mustn't be frightened about is that if there is no deal, it's not the end of this country. It just means complete freedom. And so I'm not bothered about no deal. It might be better and it's easier and smoother if there was a good deal that enabled us to do all those things. And over the next 2 months, I'm sure John and Pretty and I will be in the same lobby, in order that in the future times we can go into different lobbies, and that will be meaningful. So we have a future to defend democracy, we have a future to look forward to, which is bright for our country. But I guess it's going to be a tough couple of months for us, those of us who are trying to do it. Thank you.